Hello everyone and welcome to another Little Nightmares theory video on the channel, and today I want to talk to you about another theory I have in connection to the Sounds of Nightmares and the Little Nightmares games. But of course, before we get into that, I am going to take this time to warn you that this video is going to contain spoilers for Little Nightmares 1, 2 and the Sounds of Nightmares. Oh, and also with that being said, I'd like to remind you that if you do enjoy Little Nightmares theories and content for Little Nightmares, make sure you hit subscribe as I cover a lot of Little Nightmares to say the least. Anyway, shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's actually get into this theory video. Now, as I was saying before, this video is going to be making another connection between the Sounds of Nightmares and the Little Nightmares games, and I think this connection is very interesting. So, at the end of the Sounds of Nightmares, after Otto recalls his sessions before and all that happened to Noon and crossing the threshold, we hear the sounds of a door opening and Otto shouting, "Ethan, you shouldn't be out of your room."
So nearly was I swept away. Ethan, you shouldn't be out of your room. Oh, somnambulism. Your dreams have led you to me, then. You're sleepwalking, that's all. A common parasomnia.
Otto then suggests that Ethan is sleepwalking and that this is a new symptom for him. Ethan begins to hum, and while you can't quite make out what he's trying to say, it's implied that he's referring to the desk, as Otto responds to this sort of mumbling by saying that this is the mess on my desk, and he tells Ethan that the desk is messy because he was looking for something he lost.
What? Oh, the mess. I was looking for something I lost, but I think I've just found it. Let's get you back to sleep now.
But now Otto has found it, referring to Ethan's change in state becoming his next focus, which is, of course, as we know, not good news for Ethan. And this is where I think we might have found the identity of Ethan within the world of Little Nightmares. But it's worth mentioning that we know Otto at this point in the series is desperate to find his sister, and as we saw with how he treats Ruth, towards the end of the show, he is getting worse. Thanks to the Sounds of Nightmares, we know that when the children are sleeping and crossing that threshold into the counties to the nowhere, their physical body does disappear too. This would be on Otto's mind, and he would need to stop this from happening in the future. But how could he do so? Well, he would have to lock Ethan in place, perhaps by trying to tie them to the bed, or perhaps by chaining him to the bed with a shackle. Starting to remind you of someone familiar? That's right, the Runaway Kid. What if, and again this is where the theory is, what if Ethan is the Runaway Kid? Now I know it's a small connection, but it's a very interesting one, and I think it's a detail a lot of people are going to miss at the first glance. But of course, overthinking leads to this, and I like to think this is the perfect excuse for Otto to trying to hide his true intentions with Ethan. He could be claiming that Ethan is chained to the bed because of his sleepwalking, and it's for his own protection, his own good, to stop him damaging himself or hurting others. Also, I wonder if this is why the DLC series for the Runaway Kid is called The Depths, and this is why Otto uses the phrase sink, sink lower and lower. This is more likely suggested to Ethan from Otto. That's why when Ethan starts crossing into the nowhere, he's swimming in the void. Not to mention, it matches what the ferryman was saying at the end of chapter 6, Tideless Waters. But of course, there is a difference between Noon and Ethan. Ethan gets pulled down in the depths to the nowhere because Otto is forcing him into it. Perhaps this tells us that Ethan's situation in the counties isn't as dire as Noon was, because the whole point of the Sounds of Nightmares was to show how the ferryman was suggesting to Noon to come over. It's a better side over here, you don't have to worry about your illness. Whereas Ethan is forced into it, and he has to be pulled under by something, and it's not the ferryman. And this is how we run into the things like the granny. Now this is my tin foil hat moment, but what if, while these children are in a state of crossing over to the nowhere, they are vulnerable in this void? If they aren't guided by a ferryman or someone similar, they can be plucked from random monsters within the world. And I think the granny is a perfect example of this, because she just reaches up and pulls him under. And this also can explain why the runaway kid, Ethan, wakes up in a bed. But this got me thinking about the moor a little more. What if everything we thought about the moor is wrong? What if the moor was a way to keep kids contained that were not supposed to be in the nowhere? Perhaps this is why it only appears once a year and always at the same time, because the children in the counties only tend to try and enter at night through Otto's pursuit and need. This also brings up the whole conception of time within the nowhere. This is why I find it interesting again that the moor only appears once a year. Maybe let's not take the once a year so literal. Maybe it only appears once a night instead of a year. Perhaps in the nowhere time doesn't exactly move as quick as in the counties, for instance, or normal. Perhaps time is much slower within the nowhere, and this is why every night in the counties is a year in the nowhere, hence why the moor comes up to protect the children crossing over. Perhaps this was why originally the ferryman returned Six to the moor, because she wasn't supposed to be out in the nowhere. But even more interestingly is perhaps the ferryman was bringing Six back for Ethan to see, for Otto to get a glimpse of hope, because the ferryman knows of Otto and his attempt to get into the nowhere. Perhaps the ferryman is leading Otto on. Because if we remember rightly, in the Sounds of Nightmares, it was highlighted about the yellow coat. Perhaps this detail is enough for Otto to realise when Ethan goes back into the nowhere, and again reiterates what he sees about a girl in a yellow raincoat. Perhaps this is what gets Otto going again.